It was a cold October evening. The sky outside was gray, and the wind whispered through the empty streets of a small coastal town. Inside a rented house on the edge of the village, a man named Daniel Harper stood quietly in the bathroom. The mirror in front of him reflected a thin, pale face, middle-aged, calm, and sharp-eyed. Daniel was preparing something important, something final. This would be the third time. He had learned from the past. He knew that mistakes often came with overconfidence. So this time, he was being very, very careful. Downstairs, he heard a sound, a door creaking, footsteps on the wooden floor. Was she coming up? No. From the bathroom window, he saw her, Emily, walking slowly into the small garden behind the house. She was wearing a long sweater and holding a cup of tea. Her steps were soft, her presence peaceful. Daniel frowned. He didn't like her going out there alone. A new couple had moved into the house next door just last week. He didn't want her to make any friends. That could be dangerous for him. He sighed and returned to his plan. Each of Daniel's marriages had followed the same pattern. A quiet town, a new name, a woman without many friends or family. He would pretend to fall in love, and she, often lonely and hopeful, would believe him. Soon after the wedding, she would make a will. Everything would go to him. And then the accident. His first wife, Clara, had slipped in the bathtub. No one questioned it. The police said it was just bad luck. A young reporter wrote a small article, "Death in the Middle of Happiness," with two pictures, one from her wedding and the other from her funeral. The dates were only 4 weeks apart. His second wife, Margaret, had been a little more difficult. She had a brother who came to the funeral. The man asked questions about her savings. There was a legal case, but Daniel won. The insurance paid him, and then he disappeared again. Now, 4 years later, Daniel was back with a new name, a new story, and a new wife, Emily. He met her at a quiet seaside cafe. She was sitting alone, her eyes sad, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Daniel noticed the gold ring on her finger. It looked expensive. He approached her with soft words and gentle smiles. At first, she didn't talk much, but by the end of the week, she was laughing at his jokes. Emily was perfect. She had no family. Her parents had passed away. She had left her teaching job years ago to care for her sick mother. After her mother's death, she stayed in the house alone, unsure what to do next. She was 42, still kind, still hopeful. Daniel proposed after just 3 weeks. They married in a town where no one knew them. That same evening, they wrote wills leaving everything to each other. And then they moved into this small rented house by the sea. To Emily, it felt like the beginning of something new. To Daniel, it was the start of the end. The house they moved into was small, but cozy. The living room had large windows that looked out onto the quiet street. A soft wind often blew in from the sea, carrying the smell of salt and old wood. Emily loved that smell. It reminded her of summers with her parents long ago. Daniel said he liked the quiet too. He told her he worked in pharmaceutical sales and had to travel sometimes. Emily believed him. She didn't ask many questions, but Daniel noticed she paid attention. She kept her important papers locked in a drawer. She didn't like to talk about her savings. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she studied him quietly, curiously. Daniel reminded himself not to get too comfortable. He had to act before her trust turned into suspicion. Timing was everything. Still, she was different. Emily smiled at him with such softness. She made tea every morning. She folded his clothes with care. She listened when he spoke. She even laughed at his silly stories, though he knew most of them weren't very funny. For a brief moment, Daniel felt something strange. Guilt. No, that wasn't allowed. He pushed the feeling away. This was just another plan, and he had planned it well. One rainy afternoon, Emily stood by the window, watching the drops run down the glass. She held a book in her hand, but wasn't reading. "Daniel," she said softly, "do you ever wonder why some people fall in love so quickly?" Daniel looked up from his newspaper. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were distant. "Sometimes people just connect," he replied with a smile. "Don't you think?" She nodded slowly. "I suppose so." Then she walked away. Daniel felt a small chill. That wasn't like her. A few days later, she asked to visit his office in town. He laughed it off. "It's boring," he said. "Just desks and medicine boxes." She said nothing, but her eyes lingered on him a second too long. That evening, while she was watering the plants outside, Daniel stood in the bathroom, staring at the green wall he had painted himself. It looked almost peaceful. He had even installed a small shelf above the tub for creams and shampoos, and a cheap electric heater green like the walls. It connected to an outlet just outside the bathroom door. He turned it on. The bars glowed red. Perfect. Then he turned it off. It had to look like an accident. The sky turned dark early that day. Emily said she was going to clean the leaves off the kitchen roof. Daniel didn't like her climbing the ladder alone. From the window, he saw her, just her head and shoulders, reaching for dry leaves near the edge. Her hands were careful, her body balanced. Daniel called out gently, "Be careful, love." She nearly dropped the brush. "Oh, you scared me." He smiled. "Come inside. I've prepared your beauty bath." "A bath?" she laughed. "How sweet. I want to take you out tonight," he said. "Let you shine." She blushed. "That's very kind. Go get ready. The bubbles won't last." In the bathroom, Daniel poured rose-scented bath foam into the tub. The smell was sweet and strong. He turned on the water, letting the bubbles rise and rise until they almost spilled over. He placed the heater gently on the shelf. Then he walked downstairs to the electrical box. He waited. 1, 2, 3. With a cloth over his hand, he flipped the switch. The house went silent. A small pop came from the socket near the bathroom. He waited another minute. No sound, no movement. Everything was still. Daniel walked back upstairs, calm as ever. Now came the second part of the plan, making it look like a slow discovery. He would wait 40 minutes before knocking on the bathroom door, then shout, then pretend to panic, maybe get the neighbors involved. Yes, that worked better last time. But first, he wanted to see something. Emily had a leather case, brown, worn, and always locked. He had found it in her drawer once but didn't open it. Tonight, he could. He entered the bedroom and took out the case. The lock was tougher than he expected, but after a few minutes, it clicked. Inside, there were thick envelopes, papers, and one slim red booklet, her savings book. He opened it. £16,000, £17,500, £22,800. Then, October 7th, she had withdrawn almost everything. Was it in the envelopes? He opened one. Papers, receipts, letters. Then he saw an envelope with his name on it. To Daniel, written in her delicate handwriting. His hands trembled. He tore it open. Daniel stood still, the letter trembling in his hand. Emily's words were soft, careful, but every line hit him like a quiet storm. Dear Daniel, if you are reading this, I'm afraid it will be a terrible shock to you. I hoped I wouldn't have to write this, but now I have no choice. He sat down on the edge of the bed. The room suddenly felt colder. You probably think I am a simple woman, lonely, easy to fool. Maybe I was, but not completely. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced at the bathroom door, still closed, still silent. At first, I believed you. I wanted to, but something didn't feel right. When you asked me to make a will the night we got married, I began to wonder, why would a man like you choose a woman like me? Daniel's hands clenched the paper, and when you started fixing the bathroom, especially the shelf and the strange little heater, I knew I had to act fast. There was a pause in the letter. Then I went to the police. Daniel's breath caught. He stood up quickly, almost knocking over the chair. You may have noticed our neighbors never speak to you. That's because they're not really neighbors. They are police officers. His eyes widened. A detective gave me 2 old newspaper clippings, both about women who died after short, happy marriages. The photos weren't clear, but I recognized your face. Daniel began to pace the room, back and forth, back and forth. They've been watching you for weeks now, but they needed proof. That's why I agreed to help. He stared at the bathroom door again. Still nothing. He ran to it and tried the handle. Locked. He banged on it once, twice. No answer. He turned back to the letter. If one day you come looking for me, and I'm not in the bathtub, check the kitchen next door, because I'll be sitting there, with a cup of tea, waiting for them to bring you in. Daniel dropped the letter. His mouth twisted into a snarl. He rushed downstairs, his feet heavy, breath short. He didn't notice the shadows moving outside the window. He didn't see the flicker of a torch. Just as he reached the front door, it opened, and there they were, 2 people in plain clothes, calm, serious, focused. The man held up a badge. Daniel Harper. Or should we call you Mr. Russell, Mr. Clark, or whatever name you're using this time? Daniel's lips parted. He had no words. Behind them, In the doorway of the house next door stood Emily, wrapped in a warm coat, holding a cup of tea. Her eyes were sad but steady. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Daniel understood. It was over. The police didn't handcuff Daniel right away. They didn't need to. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He just stood there, frozen, as if the cold October air had turned him into stone. His eyes flicked toward Emily. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, not with anger, not with hate, but with quiet understanding and disappointment. For Daniel, that was worse. The officers asked him to step inside. He followed them without a word. Inside the living room, everything looked normal, too normal, as if nothing had been planned here, as if no death had ever lived in his mind. But it had, and now it was out in the open. One officer went upstairs to the bathroom. The other began asking questions. Daniel answered mechanically. His voice was empty, as if someone else was speaking for him. He didn't deny it. He didn't confess either. He just sat there, staring at the green walls he had painted himself, wondering how it had all unraveled. In the house next door, Emily sat in the small kitchen, her hands wrapped around her tea. The policewoman sat beside her, quiet, present, protective. Outside the window, she could see the back of the house she had shared with Daniel. The bubbles in the tub had probably faded by now. The rose scent would still linger. She had been inside that bathroom many times, but never to die, only to survive. She remembered the moment she climbed down from the ladder, walked calmly to the neighbor's back door, and whispered, "It's time." They had moved swiftly. The officer had already cut power to the heater plug. The bath was harmless now, just water and foam. Still, her heart had raced, not because of fear, but because she had seen it in Daniel's eyes. That switch, that cold stillness, the look of a man who had done this before and nearly got away with it again. Now she sat in silence. The truth was out, but peace would take time. She wasn't broken. She wasn't weak, but she was tired. Later that evening, one of the detectives came in and sat across from her. He was gentle, patient. "We'll take him into custody tonight," he said. "You won't see him again." Emily nodded. He looked at her, almost hesitating. "We wouldn't have caught him without you. What you did took courage." She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, she said, "I just didn't want to be his third story." The next morning, the sky was pale and cloudless. Seagulls floated above the rooftops. The waves outside the town whispered gently against the shore. Emily stood at the edge of the small garden behind the house, the same place where she had once picked dry leaves, the same place where Daniel had watched her from the window, already planning. She looked up at the kitchen roof. The ladder was still there. Everything looked the same, but inside her, everything had changed. The house was quiet now. No footsteps, no fake smiles, no hidden danger, just silence and sunlight. She walked back inside slowly. In the living room, a small box sat on the table, the leather case she had once locked away. It had been returned by the police that morning. Everything was still there: her documents, her mother's letters, old photos, and one small folded note she had written for herself the night she decided to go to the police. She opened it again. It was just 5 words. "If I wait, I die." Emily sat down on the couch. She touched the paper softly. For a long time, she had believed that love would save her. Then she realized something deeper. It wasn't love that saved her. It was listening to herself, to that quiet voice inside that said, "This isn't right." The neighbors, the real ones, had started returning from holiday. One of them, an older woman with kind eyes, stopped by later that day with a fresh loaf of bread. "I heard you went through something," she said gently. "You're very brave." Emily gave a small smile. "I think I was lucky," she said. The woman tilted her head. "Lucky?" Emily nodded. "Yes, I was lucky enough to wake up before it was too late." That night, she made herself a cup of tea. She sat by the window, looking at the moonlight on the street. There were no more footsteps coming up behind her, no more fear waiting behind a smile. She took a deep breath, and then she began to write. A letter not to Daniel, not to the police, but to herself. "Dear Emily, you were not foolish. You were hopeful. You were not blind. You were learning. And now you are not broken. You are beginning again." She folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and turned off the light. Outside, the sea kept breathing, and inside, so